The wilderness was a very important place in God's story. God led his people into the wilderness to humble them and to test them to see what was in their heart. God wanted to see the hearts of his people. God wanted to see the desires of their heart. God wanted to see whether the desires of their heart resembled the desires of his heart. God wanted to see whether God's people were seeking God's heart. He led them into the wilderness to humble them by causing them to hunger so that he could see what were they hungry for. What were they hungry for? Were they hungry for the love of their Father in heaven? Sadly, the tragedy of the Old Testament is that God's people and all people were more hungry for the sinful desires of their own heart. God allowed his people to hunger in the wilderness. God wanted to see whether his people wanted to resemble their Father in heaven. But God's people were hungry for the sinful desires of their heart, so God's people failed to resemble their Father in heaven. And that's the tragedy of the Old Testament. And the tragedy of the Old Testament, the wounds of the Old Testament, are being healed by the joy in the New Testament. The wounds of the Old Testament are being healed by the good news of the New Testament. The good news of Jesus Christ. The good news of the presence of heaven on earth. The presence of heaven on earth, healing all who are wounded and broken by sin. Healing all who are wounded and broken by sin. And the joy of being God's heavenly and healing presence. And Jesus was consumed by the joy of being God's heavenly and healing presence on earth. And because he was consumed by that joy, he had no desire for any of the pleasures offered by the devil.